Hey, welcome to a new series of mine, Weird Warhammer. Here I'll be showing off weird Warhammer related things I've come across, normally pertaining to older Warhammer lore. This video in particular will be about strange things I've noticed in horribly outdated 1st edition roleplay book, alongside some other strange facts. I'll leave citations in a comment or description in case you'd like to read about these weird things yourself or are just interested in old Warhammer. A lot of this stuff is not canon anymore, unless stated otherwise, but it certainly is interesting to peer into the past. So, we all know there's 4 big bad chaos gods in Warhammer. It's one of the main staples of the series. Well, apparently that was not always the case. Originally there were only 3 major chaos deities: Khorne, the blood god; Nurgle, lord of pestilence and decay; and Malal? Some of you might already know Malal because of Kaleb, Daark, or the Sons of Malice, but for those of you who aren't in the loop, Malal was a rogue chaos god who is basically the embodiment of chaos's infighting. His disciples fight the other chaos god's followers. This kind of makes him the most chaotic chaos god in a way. Malal is a pretty interesting concept and has a very interesting meta history which will be discussed in a solo video for sure. It's strange and honestly pretty funny to think he was one of the big baddies though. The Great Unclean Ones are an iconic part of Nurgle, so I was shocked to find out he had a completely different greater demon back in the day known as the Mabrothrax. Its name sounds like a disease, which is neat, but the design is pretty compared to the Great Unclean Ones. They seem more like a prototype plague bearer than a precursor to the GUOs to me. There isn't much information on the Mabrothrax, but it apparently can manifest as a foul stinking wind, and also in a physical form. It just exists to do what plague bearers do, spread the great gifts of Grandfather Nurgle. I'm really glad these guys were gotten rid of. They're pretty lame compared to the Great Unclean Ones. Khorne also had an alternative greater demon, the Viydaag. It's basically just a super killy Grim Reaper who's 10 feet tall. Some of you may have noticed something about the Gods of Law on the page with the Chaos Gods. These gods aren't like Sigmar or Ulrich or anything like that. They apparently came into existence around the same time as the Gods of Chaos and want perfect order in the world. According to the text, the world would cease to change if they had their way. Reminds me of the God Emperor of Mankind becoming a Chaos God of Order in 40k theory. There were 3 known Gods of Law: Solkan, the Master of Vengeance; Alluminas, the Master of Light; and Arianka, the Goddess of Discipline. Solkan is noted as being very popular with witch hunters, which is fitting considering he's the embodiment of unrelenting black and white justice. Many people fear his followers because they associate bigotry and absolutism with them. Unlike most other gods in Warhammer, Solkan occasionally actually gets off his behind and can kick some butt. The Reman Empire is one of the mightiest and earliest empires of mankind. Gee, I wonder where GW came up with that one. The Blood God wanted to bring it to its knees, and so chaos cults began to infiltrate the empire and destroy it from within before Khorne commanded his followers to strike the weakened Remans. They ravaged the empire and it seemed it would fall to the Khornate hordes. As their capital burned, Solkan himself emerged onto the battlefield. He may not care much for men, but he didn't want his temple to be defiled by the dark gods. The champion of Khorne, Viydaag, stood before him and challenged him to battle. Viydaag was a mighty chaos ogre and powered greatly by his dark deity. Their battle was legendary. Viydaag had the upper hand on Solkan and struck him in his chest. Instead of killing him though, he shattered an amulet Solkan had on. Solkan took this opportunity to gut the ogre. Without their leader, the armies of Khorne were repulsed and the invasion was over. A pretty awesome story. Solkan did not mess around, as you can see. That isn't all there is to this god though. There's more. Remember the amulet the ogre broke? Well, it turns out it's pretty important to the Skaven of all people. You see, Solkan had waged a war on the Great Horned Rat at one point and captured his favorite Vermin Lord, a greater demon of the Great Horned Rat, and placed him in a prison of ice. If all the bits of his amulet are collected, then you could teleport to the prison to check in on him for Solkan. The Skaven all want the amulet to free the Vermin Lord. Little do they know, the amulet isn't actually able to be used by Skaven. Seems Solkan was a bit of a troll. Interestingly, he made a somewhat modern appearance in the prologue of an Archaon novel where Be'lakor tells some Chileans he's not real. I don't know if Be'lakor's words can be trusted though, considering he's Be'lakor. The next god of law we'll be discussing is Arianka, Goddess of Discipline. Or, as I like to call her, the Sleepy Goddess. Arianka was defeated and imprisoned by an unknown chaos god, most likely Tzeentch. She lays imprisoned in a coffin of the mightiest Gromril underneath the cursed city of Prague. The Skaven tried to burn the coffin with a flamethrower, which is pretty funny. They failed though. It's implied the reason Chaos is so focused on the city is to secure her body. Kaleb, Daark, champion of Malal, was tasked with killing her. Unfortunately, when GW lost the rights to Malal, Kaleb and Arianka were gone too. And the reason I call her the Sleepy Goddess is because all she does is sleep under Prague. The final god of law is probably the strangest, Alluminas, Lord of Light. There isn't much lore on him, which makes sense considering he's the least popular of the 3 known gods of law. Alluminas is an everlasting and unchanging source of pure light which is said to immobilize everything it strikes, rendering it unmoving and unchanging. Good luck explaining that to a medieval peasant and getting him to understand it. Heck, good luck explaining that to someone today and seeing if they'll get it. I can certainly see why he's the least popular of the 3 as he's probably the hardest to understand. I do really like the idea of it though. The Gods of Law have a greater demon of their own too, a Viydaag. It's a life elemental who was apparently made to counter Khorne's old greater demon, the Mardag. Its appearance is that of a 10-foot tall, beautiful woman whose hair is always blowing in the wind. I guess it's got a portable magic fan or something with it. Elves and Talaans disagree whether the Viydaag is a demon of Arianka or Solkan. You guys know Khaine, right? The god of murder who's venerated by the Dark Elves. I always thought of him as a sort of evil, monstrous looking elf, but according to the first edition roleplay book, he looks nothing like that. He's a massive, grotesque, four-armed creature of jagged teeth and daggers in each arm. The dude looks like a Khorne demon or something. Man, imagine if avatars of Khaine look similar to this thing in 40k. Now that'd be interesting. Now, moving on from divine oddities, let's get into some other ones. Apparently dwarfs in old Warhammer had close relatives, the Gnomes. I can see why GW got rid of them. They're just dwarfs, but smaller and harder to get along with. They'd be worth keeping if they had the cool gnome hats though. Lizardmen also weren't always the children of the old ones or even affiliated with Lustria. They were mostly cave dwellers who would raid dwarf and goblin holds. They were also not too intelligent, even having companions known as troglodytes. Troglodytes seem to be a prototype source who are really dumb and apparently smelly too. Man, I'm glad lizardmen are how they are now instead of generic enemies. Hobgoblins apparently had a full head of black hair, which is, well, it's certainly interesting. Black orcs weren't super soldiers like they are now. Instead, they were extra orky orcs made from inbreeding. Jeez, man, that is rough. The idea of mushroom orcs wasn't a thing yet, so there were also half orcs. I must say, I prefer the shroom orc idea myself. Comically, there's a class known as protagonists, which seems to be making fun of the murder hobo trope from role-playing games. The Slann were also quite different while still holding a similar role to the one they do in modern lore. They were still the children of the old ones who helped shape the earth and are extremely powerful mages. However, they didn't have the lizardmen serving them. In fact, the lizardmen were apparently actively against them. The Slann were also able to be corrupted by chaos, even if it was rare. It still happened, which is pretty weird to imagine. I mean, imagine a Zintaline Lord Croak. Slann instead had to battle Chaos alone, and it seemed they were facing a losing battle. Chaos was in a good position to finally end the Slann for good, it would seem. This has been the first episode of Weird Warhammer. Hopefully it was alright. This is a bit different, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. I think it's fun to delve into some of the older stuff and just see how much things have changed. I do plan on focusing on some of the more bizarre aspects in future videos, or compare some old stuff versus new stuff, but I was doing some reading about this stuff for fun and figured it'd be something interesting to talk about in a video itself. If you know any weird lore that you think would be fun to talk about and you don't think it would fit into a video of its own, comment it and it might make it into one of these. I might also make a Discord for the channel in the future, so if I do, you can mention it there. I'd like to make a Witcher or Dark Souls lore video just to mix things up, but this channel will still be mainly Warhammer focused for the most part. I just don't want to lock myself into doing one thing forever, especially because, you know, I have multiple interests, so I'd like to talk about the things I'm interested in. The Gods of Law are a pretty neat concept, but I can see why they were phased out. I would not mind seeing them again though, particularly Alluminas. Malal is an awesome concept, and it's a shame he can't be used anymore. GW has made a couple XPs for him, but I don't know if it's the same. Malal had some official sketches for lesser and greater demons of his, but they were never officially released. It's pretty interesting. This outro has already been pretty lengthy, so I apologize. If you like this video, I suggest you jump further down the Warhammer rabbit hole.